call is now being recorded.
Okay, we are now on. I am joined by Robb Wolf, the author of the best-selling The Paleo Solution, the Original Human Diet. Robb, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit on your background and how you got interested in health and nutrition.
Oh gosh, I guess I've always been at least somewhat interested in health and human performance. I was a California state powerlifting champion way back in the day. Unfortunately, both my parents were pretty unhealthy, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune diseases. So I from a pretty early age, have kind of had, mortality and morbidity kind of smacked right in my face. I think that this has kind of directed me into a healthier kind of lifestyle, and it directed my kind of undergrad activities. I did an undergrad in biochemistry, went into cancer and autoimmunity research, and then it was actually at that time that I started doing some paleo diet related research. I did a research fellowship with Professor Lauren Cordain out at Colorado State University, and then for some reason I decided to take kind of a 90-degree turn from my career at that time, and I opened a gym, which was NorCal Strength and Conditioning in Chico, California. We were picked as one of Men's Health top 30 gyms in America, and I think a big part of the reason for that is that we use this kind of evolutionary medicine, paleo diet approach to talk to people about sleep and food and exercise and kind of systemic inflammatory considerations of their current lifestyle, and we tend to get really good results from people, both with regards to their aesthetics and also their health. So I guess that's kind of my big picture background. And then currently I'm 41 and still trying to compete in old dude Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and lift some weights a little bit and try to look like somebody that actually does some physical activity for their lifestyle.
Nice. So it seems like there's a background or a particular theme for those who become fanatical about not only like the paleo diet, but diet and leading a healthy lifestyle in general. And it's that they come from a background of acute and severe health issues. Does the paleo diet benefit those who aren't battling these very acute chronic issues? And what are some of like the specific mechanisms behind this diet that makes it superior to, say, like a vegetarian or just like your standard low-calorie diet?
Sure. It's interesting. I think, and you kind of touched on an interesting feature of paleo and probably even veganism and stuff like that. But the people who tend to gravitate towards a lot of these approaches tend to be either very, very sick, or they tend to be high-level athletes who are looking for a performance boost. And so what does that mean for kind of the average person then? And, within the paleo scene, what we have kind of figured out with our research directly and then kind of indirect kind of inferences from looking at epidemiology and other research is that the paleo diet is very anti-inflammatory. It's a low inflammation producing diet. And inflammation is a natural process in the body. It's an outgrowth of our immune system doing what the immune system should do. But it's kind of like, it's not Little Miss Muffet. It's Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Like you don't want too much. You don't want too little. You want the right amount of inflammation. Too much inflammation, too much immune activity is an autoimmune situation. Too little immune function is immune compromise, like an HIV/AIDS or a predisposition for cancer development. And so we want just the right amount. And so the pieces that go into that are beyond even just food, but sleep, vitamin D levels, photo period, exercise, socialization, and then also the food. And it's interesting, even though on the food diet, I'm constantly talking about this bigger picture kind of evolutionary medicine perspective of us evolving as hunter-gatherers, and that there's much more than just the food that we need to talk about to really get to the optimization. But within the food, what we see is that this tends to be a very, very nutritious diet. My friend Matt Lalonde did an amazing research project where he took all of the food in USDA nutrient database, and there are thousands and thousands of entries, but he basically put all these foods into an Excel spreadsheet and started comparing the amounts of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants per calorie that these different foods have. And what was interesting that came out of that was that meat, fish, seafood came out on top as far as nutrient density, the best foods that you could eat with per calorie as far as getting vitamins, minerals, antioxidants per calorie. Right behind that was fruits and vegetables. And then kind of distant from that was grains, legumes, and dairy, which tends to be kind of the cornerstone of this kind of government-recommended food pyramid, or now the My Plate kind of story. So even using the parameters that most registered dietitians would recommend, which is a nutrient-dense diet, ironically, the dietitians will recommend a nutrient-dense diet, but then recommend foods that are, in fact, not very nutrient-dense. But this kind of paleo evolutionary biology perspective actually provides the most nutrient-dense foods for it. And then as an aside, these foods tend to be very low in immunogenic potential. They tend not to cause gut permeability. They tend not to cause allergies. And so we get some really kind of synergistic benefits out of all that. We get highly nutritious food, and we tend to have a low inflammatory kind of potential from eating this way.
So with all these success stories that you've seen through the paleo diet, and you work with people firsthand at your gym, in your estimation, is it more of a matter that these foods are nutrient dense, or is it that they're removing foods that are inflammatory? Like if you had to guess which of those two mechanisms plays a larger role, what would that be?
Man, that's really tough, because a lot of the situations that we see, some characteristics of autism, some characteristics of type 2 diabetes are from nutrient deficiency. But then it's interesting, if you become inflamed from a gut irritating food, say like gluten, which we get gluten in wheat, rye, oats, corn, barley, millet, or some other gut irritating foods, when we go under an oxidative stress from inflammation, then we tend to burn through vital nutrients like vitamins and antioxidants. So depending on what day you ask me that question, like I could literally kind of flip-flop and say one day that it's way more important to get the nutrients from foods so that we are as healthy as possible, so that the foods that we do eat that are pro-inflammatory cause a little problem. And then on another day, you'll ask me that question, and I'll say, well, it's really important to avoid the pro-inflammatory food, because then the nutrients that we are getting are able to act as effectively in our body as we can. And it's a little bit chicken and egg, and it's interesting from an anthropological perspective. This is a little bit of what we see as the transition from the hunter-gatherer lifeway into the agrarian lifeway, is we tend to see an increase in cavities with the adoption of agriculture. We see increased infant mortality rates. We see shorter people because we see less calcium in the diet and stuff like that. And so it tends to be a synergistic effect that when we're eating these lower quality foods, they're both inflammatory and lower in nutrient density. And so but that's a really, really good question. And again, like depending on the hour or the day that you ask me that, I may lean a little bit more one direction versus the other.
Interesting. So you mentioned that people with autism and autoimmune can benefit from the paleo diet. What other diseases have you seen that people have that have the greatest success with going paleo?
I would say that I was going to say autoimmune disease, but I think that that's still true. But type 2 diabetes and insulin-resistant conditions benefit enormously from paleo, but we've seen really shocking benefit with type 2 diabetes and insulin-resistant peridiabetic situations with simply eating low carb. Like we've known that for 30 years, 40 years. Like sticking type 2 diabetics on a low carb diet is incredibly beneficial. The fact that our medical community still fights that situation should be grounds for medical malpractice, but it's not. But something that mainstream medicine has really failed to address in an effective way throughout all of medical history is autoimmune disease. And this includes lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, a huge variety of skin conditions, vitiligo, which is a condition where people lose pigmentation in the skin, a variety of alopecia, like hair loss. Like autoimmune conditions go on and on and on. Even narcolepsy, where people will get excited and fall asleep, that actually has some autoimmune underpinnings to it. And very interestingly, we've seen shocking improvements in autoimmune conditions with a grain, laden, dairy-free paleo diet. And we still are not 100% sure what's going on here. There definitely appears to be some gut permeability, some ability for the intestinal content and the bacteria and the bacterial kind of exterior products to make their way into the body, and through a variety of immunologically driven processes, we get an autoimmune response. And we also get a systemic inflammatory response, which tends to make us insulin resistant also, but that's kind of an aside. But what we've found is that if we can quiet that gut permeability, if we can dial down the systemic inflammation, we've seen people reverse their autoimmune conditions. It was interesting. We've been humping Dr. Oz's knee for 3 or 4 years now to talk about paleo, and one of his main producers, her cousin, is a beautiful young woman who has or had multiple sclerosis, and she was actually wheelchair bound. We had brain imaging showing scarring lesions in the brain, and then she went paleo, and the multiple sclerosis reversed. Her brain healed. She can walk and run and lift weights and live a vibrant life now. And we were trying for years to get Dr. Oz to talk about this. And apparently his both the momentum that paleo has and his production assistant finally wore him down, and they did an episode on paleo, and they had several people on the show that have reversed autoimmune diseases. And so I would say that the thing that we really have a feather in our cap for is autoimmune and particularly severe systemic inflammatory conditions that are not being resolved at all by vegetarian eating, by vegan eating, clearly by standard American eating is doing nothing for these conditions. And mainstream medicine is very ineffective at dealing with them. Behind cardiovascular disease and cancer, autoimmune diseases are the greatest threat with regards to morbidity and mortality, and mainstream medicine is very ineffective at treating them.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think everyone at this point either knows someone or knows someone who knows someone with some form of an autoimmune disorder. So it'd be interesting to see more people pick up the paleo diet to see if it works.
Yeah, and just as an aside, my greasy used car salesman pitch on that whole thing is give it a shot for 30 or 60 days and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then please, either way, whether it works or doesn't work, please tell me, tell Professor Lauren Pradane, tell somebody that is in the research community around this so that we can continue to develop kind of our intellectual framework on this. We have an NIH-funded R01 study that is hopefully going to launch this year looking specifically at paleo and autoimmune disease. But again, my greasy used car salesman pitch on this is just give it a shot for 30 to 60 days and see what the heck happens. And if it doesn't work, then you could always do something else. But we've had really, really good success with people giving the autoimmune flavor of the paleo diet a shot.
Yeah, I totally agree. So with Tech Cocktail's audience being very largely entrepreneurial, let's imagine the following scenario. You're the CEO of a small tech startup. Your team recognizes that you are a health and wellness guru, and therefore they're willing to implement any advice that you're going to give them. What sort of guidelines would you offer your team in terms of diet, exercise, and lifestyle in order to get the greatest performance out of your team?
Gosh, it's funny. So I'm the food guy, but I inevitably end up talking about sleep even before food. And if you were to do one thing that was a maximum return on investment, it would be to, by hook or by crook, whether it's buying jawbones for all of your staff, I don't know how exactly you would monitor or do some quantified self on this, but really encouraging people to sleep more and sleep more at night, take a nap. And my wife is part of a startup, and some really high-level people, like some high-level Expedia and Travelocity people that are on her team, and these guys work themselves to the nub, and I'm friends with all of them and kind of help them with some of their food and lifestyle stuff. And you can see immediate drop-off in productivity when these guys burn the sleep, when they will do a really productive night, stay up all night, but then for days afterwards, their productivity is impacted. And I just had a guy on my podcast, episode 181 of my Paleo Solution podcast, Dr. Kirk Parsley, who's a former U.S. Navy SEAL, went to med school, came back and started doing all of the medical concerns for the West Coast SEALs. And the guy's a sleep expert, and he's just a wealth of information on this topic and has really helped me refine my understanding of all this. But it's clear that when we sleep deprive ourselves, we feel like we're being more productive, but we're not. The cognitive neuroscience studies on this are crystal clear. So, there's a strong argument to be made for wrapping folks up at a reasonable hour. I know that a lot of, tech startups will use different monitoring software so that they know how many, lines of code people are writing and at what time and all that sort of stuff. And it sounds totally counterintuitive, and it maybe even sounds a little bit wimpish to recommend it, but I would try for a month. See how people work as a baseline, and what their productivity is and what the error rate is, like how many bugs you have to go back and fix. And then for a month, just force people to go to bed earlier. Turn off the TV, turn off the iPhones, no electronics in the room, pitch black rooms, and try to get people to sleep an extra hour or 2 hours. And an optimization with that, try to get people to go to bed without some sort of pharmacological aid, and then try to get them to wake up without an alarm and see what their productivity is under those circumstances. And I think that what you would find, ironically and counterintuitively, is that fewer hours of work will end up being more productive because people are on task better and they create fewer errors. Like again, the cognitive neuroscience studies on this are crystal clear. Even an hour or two of sleep deprivation day in, day out ends up really, really severely impacting productivity and creativity. And I can't think about what things are more important for a startup. And I think that this is also part of the reason why we see a real shifting towards the youthful side of things in the startup world, because when you're younger, you can withstand the impact of sleep deprivation a little bit better. But as you get a little bit older, you get into your late 20s, early 30s, that stuff really starts kicking you down into the kneecaps. And by the time you hit your 40s and you're ancient like I am, then it really impacts you. But if you can get people to sleep better, they can be just as productive, just as creative as what they were in their 20s. They need to mind their sleep a little better. And then from there, clearly eating better, like trying to eat a little bit along the paleo side, I think is amazing. But ironically, the food guy is actually recommending that folks focus primarily on sleep as the first thing that they try to fix, and you're going to get the greatest return on investment out of any other thing that you could do.
Is there sort of a golden number that you tell people to aim for in terms of how much sleep they get? Because I know people who say they can survive off of just anywhere from like 6 to 7 hours of sleep at night. Is that an accurate, objective way of being able to determine how they feel after their sleep, or should they be getting closer to the 8 or 9 hour range?
There's huge variability on this. So there are legitimately some people that, and I hate these people, but they legitimately 5 or 6 hours of sleep, they are firing on all cylinders. Their brain chemistry is normal. Their immunological function is normal. Their gut function is normal. The thing is that one of the insidious features of sleep deprivation is that an hour or two of lost sleep, you notice it the first day in a subjective manner. It's like, I feel tired, I feel lethargic, I don't feel very creative. But after about 3 or 4 days, this becomes your gray altar world of existence. And you just never even notice that you feel like hell and that you're really not firing on all cylinders. So there are some people who legitimately can not just get by on less sleep, because getting by is different than thriving, but they're fine on less sleep. Interestingly, those people live less long. And so they in total hours of wakeful life, it ends up being about the same as the people who sleep longer, but yet live longer. So that's just kind of an interesting side. Our wakefulness seems to be very, very tied into our total longevity. But, the litmus test for me in this whole thing is the person, when the sun starts going down, they turn off every electronic item in their house. This is the test. They turn off all the electronic items. They turn off their cell phones. They maybe have some candles lit. Their room is pitch black, and the sun is going down. And when you have all of your stuff turned off, you tend to not be fidgety and anxious and trying to do something. And so you go to bed. It's like the hunter-gatherer scenario. When the sun went down, we went to bed, and when the sun came up, we got up. So in this scenario, if the person legitimately in a pitch black room, no alarm clock to wake them up, no electronic to mess with their hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis to keep them awake, if they legitimately sleep 5 to 6 hours, then that's what they need, and they wake up refreshed. The main thing is, how long would you, if you were on vacation on a desert island with no electronics and you were allowed to go to bed when the sun went down and wake up when you want to wake up, how long do you actually live on, or how long do you actually sleep under those circumstances? And that is typically about what your body really needs to fire on all cylinders. And it's just very, very rare that people actually do that. And it sounds insane when I say it, because people are working these 16 and 18-hour days and they're driving themselves. But again, there's some kind of avant-garde businesses out there that are actually looking at the cognitive neuroscience literature, and are realizing that people would be better off with a nap. They would be better off, literally forcing them to sleep longer, because they're going to be more productive. They have fewer errors. Virtually every case of police excessive force is immediately adjacent to a shift change. So the police officer has either just experienced a complete change in his or her shift, or they've been up for 24 or 36, multiple day shifts. It's very, very rare that the person has been in a static, stable shift schedule that you end up with an excessive force scenario. So, it's easy to imagine making a variety of mistakes, whether it's emotionally loaded mistakes like in being a police officer, or coding mistakes if you're working in a tech startup, if you are very, very tired.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly vouch for that myself. I was the guy before who was watching Netflix until 2 or 3 a.m. And then waking up to an alarm at 8 a.m. And then I spent the next 6 months living in the woods without the distraction of electronics, and my sleep I was getting anywhere from 9 to 10 hours a night just because I was living on the sun schedule. So, yeah, I can definitely vouch for what you're saying there. So are there any other lifestyle tweaks other than sleep? Obviously, you kind of point out as first and foremost. Are there any other lifestyle tweaks that you would recommend to entrepreneurs in order to maximize their productivity?
So people find it really challenging to exercise, particularly in a startup scenario, because things are very, very intense. And this gets tough because I know, being a writer, it's hard to be interrupted and to break focus. And so I know when people are writing code, this can be a challenge. But the recommendation I'm going to make is, instead of trying to find a specific block of an hour or a half hour a day to work out, try to do mini workouts throughout the day. And that could involve just some body weight activities, like getting a TRX set up so you can do some body rows and some foot elevated push-ups, some air squats, maybe get a kettlebell so you can do some kettlebell swing. Every hour, maybe every hour and a half, you do set a timer and you jump up and you kind of run around, get a foam roller, do some foam rolling, do some mobility, do a quick little body weight circuit, and then get back to your work. It's interesting. A walk or a little bit of exercise is, again, research has shown, is much better than even snacking on like a sugary snack, as far as normalizing blood glucose level and improving creativity and productivity. So I think trying to get a little bit of sun on your skin, a little bit of sun in your eyes, again, that interaction of our photo period and the HPTA axis is really, really critical for normal sleep, for normal productivity, for normal immune function. And then from a kind of work and efficiency standpoint, trying to break up our workout throughout the day, get maybe 4, 5, 6 little mini workouts throughout the day, and you'll tend to feel better. And people who are writing code, they get horrible posture. They're hunched over. They're sitting all day. They get some low back problems, super tight hamstrings and hip flexors. So there's an opportunity to kind of undo that stuff and do it in kind of punctuated pieces. And again, you just have to play with the return on investment element of that versus being able to focus on a project. And I know that that's hard when I'm really working on a long book project. It sometimes takes me an hour just to really get a head of steam going, So if you have a really juicy project you're working on, you may not be able to come up for air for 3 or 4 hours because you really need to focus to be able to get that continuity kind of established. But that's a thing that folks could do is try to get little mini workouts throughout the day.
Hey, how about those entrepreneurs that are willing to invest more of their time in a given week toward exercise? In your opinion, what is the minimum effective dose, to borrow in Tim Ferriss's terminology, in terms of exercise time that entrepreneurs should target? And then what would these workouts look like?
Gosh, you really don't need much. Full body circuit training, maybe twice a week, that would take you 15 to 30 minutes max each session. So there's an hour, somewhere between a half hour and an hour a week. I really like to get people outside and walking. And if they can do it in nature or in a more natural environment, that's preferable. But short of that, just getting sun on their skin. And again, this is all the biophysical kind of communication between our body and our environment. So getting out and walking. And with that, walking can be a little bit time consuming because you can go walk for several hours. So maybe that's a little bit, unproductive in a kind of maximum return on investment. And so people would tend to recommend some interval training where you could do Tabata intervals, 20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest, either sprinting or an exercise bike or a Concept 2 rower, and you only need to do 4 minutes of that. You really get a potent response, but there's something to be said also from just some really relaxed, low intensity, just walking, getting out in the environment and covering some ground. And so from a minimalist perspective, I could say do a full body circuit weight training kind of gig twice a week, and each of those would be between 15 minutes to a half hour. And then do some interval training, and you can do a couple, tons of different intervals. None of those will take you more than a half hour a piece to do that, maybe 1 or 2 days a week with that. And then we've got 4 days a week of kind of physical activity that we have interspersed in there. And then as much as possible, just get out and walk. And maybe this is your time where you bring a voice recorder and you do some vocal notes of some projects that you're working on. You can do a little bit more open-ended thinking and creativity work, but that just getting out in nature, walking, kind of unplugging from the indoor environment is incredibly beneficial for folks. But from the kind of return on investment perspective, it's maybe a little bit longer, but it's really, really valuable.
Yeah, interesting. So one section of the Paleo Solution I think you'd get excellent compliance amongst the Tech Cocktail reader base is in the blood work section. Entrepreneurs are typically proficient at measuring and testing. In your opinion, what markers are the most important, and what ranges should we look for?
Gosh, the easy ones are blood glucose, triglycerides, and then maybe a triglyceride to HDL ratio. I go further down the rabbit hole than that, but if your triglycerides are anything above 100, we are starting to see some metabolic problems, like some insulin resistance, metabolic derangement. Blood glucose that is in a fasted state, anything consistently above 90, we have some problems going on. And then if we've got a triglyceride to HDL ratio that is creeping up above 2, really anything above 1, and this is in U.S. values. International units don't work the same way, fortunately or unfortunately. So, but those are really, really simple. They come in any standard blood test. If I were to hang my hat maybe on the most important one out of that bunch, it might be triglycerides, because they are a measure of circulating blood fat. But interestingly, they tell us in a kind of indirect way what our insulin sensitivity is. And counterintuitively, when we become insulin resistant, the carbohydrate that we eat is converted into triglycerides and tends to elevate circulating triglycerides. Eating fat, eating a lower carb diet doesn't really drive up triglycerides. It'll actually bring them down due to improving insulin sensitivity. So those are the really quick, easy things that are my go-to again and again and again.
Good. That's great information. Thank you. And in your book, there is a section titled, Do You Own Your Things or Do Your Things Own You?, where you suggest that people are working harder than necessary to buy things that ultimately make them unhappy. That being said, do you have any advice to someone who may be on the fence about starting their own company and entering into this high-stress, low-to-no-sleep world?
Wow. Gosh, having started a couple of reasonably successful businesses now, it's definitely, there's a cost associated with it. Like the worst thing that I ever did for my health and athleticism was open a gym. The second worst thing that I ever did for my health and athleticism was write a New York Times bestselling diet book, and do all the stuff associated with supporting that. And so, but that said, I've also loved what I've done more than anything that I ever did in my life. And I loved being a research chemist and getting into the scientific underpinnings of health and disease. Like I really enjoyed that. But being an entrepreneur, I've loved like nothing else. And now we've gone from like a brick and mortar gym scenario to book writing, and now we're getting into actually kind of the tech side of things on like a national kind of educational front for physicians and healthcare providers. And my wife is working on a business management software. So it's interesting. I think you just have to really recognize that if you're going to go into the entrepreneur scene, there are definitely going to be some sacrifices along the way. You need to be prepared for that. Some people are not. I had always identified myself as an athlete, and that was part of like my psyche and my makeup. And I had to really let go of a lot of my athleticism to put the work in to be able to do the projects that I've done. And now at 41, I'm actually circling back, and I'm able to go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 3 to 5 times a week and lift some weights. And I'm still very busy on the business side, but I've managed to pull out of the technician role and be more in the administrative kind of CEO role and have people under me that can take ideas and implement those ideas and run with them. But it's taken 10 years of really, really hard work to get to that spot. So I think understanding that there could be huge rewards at the end of the whole endeavor, but there's going to be some sacrifice along the way. And even though I constantly am talking about sleep and food and exercise, like there was a long period of time where my sleep and my exercise sucked. I always was able to keep my food good, but, I was the worst example of good lifestyle management from that perspective. But it's what I had to do to be able to get through that process, and then I've been able to tighten things up and make things better. But, I think it's just, really understanding that you might be in for a long slog. Hopefully you put a minimal amount of time into it, and the thing goes to the moon and you're stoked. But you may be in a 10-year-long battle with our first 2 years of running our business. We existed off of less than $10,000 a year of income because we were just dumping everything back into the gym, and we had no idea what we were doing initially. And we lived in a tiny, college dorm type apartment and had cars that were like 15 years old but still functional and no kids at that time. So we were able to do it. But we've sacrificed in a way that I don't see very many people being willing to sacrifice. And that's ultimately what led to our success.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I could ask you 1,000 more questions, but we're already well over the time that I promised you that it would be. If they wanted to get more information from you, where could our visitors go?
Just go to robbwolf.com, robbwolf.com. Everything you would need to start the paleo diet, tons of analysis of research papers, lots of support there. And then I also have listed off the website my podcast, which has been going for 3 years now. We have 182 episodes of the podcast, and we cover every topic under the sun that you could imagine. So you can search the podcast archives for anything from like sleep deprivation to in vitro fertilization, and typically we've had some commentary on it.
I am one of the listeners of the podcast, and I definitely recommend it to anyone listening to this. Rob, thank you so much for your time. It is greatly appreciated. I know our readers are going to get a lot of value out of what you had to offer for us today.
Awesome. Well, thanks. It's a huge honor being on. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, so thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Rob.
Totally. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.